The honor guard kept dropping the rifle, over and over again, in front of generals, dignitaries, and soon, the president himself. The pressure was unbearable until an 80-year-old veteran slowly stood up from a park bench. No one knew who he was, but when he picked up the rifle, the entire platoon went silent. What happened next became legend. Please support us by subscribing to the channel and drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from. You ever hear the sound of failure? Not just any failure, I'm talking about the kind that echoes off sacred stone and makes every soul within earshot wince. That was the sound when the M1 rifle hit the pavement in front of the Chapel of Valor. Private Caleb Monroe was only 19. His hands were slick with sweat, his nerves shot to hell. The rifle, a solid 10-pound piece of wood and war, clattered to the concrete, the stock chipping as it fell. It was his third drop that morning. Captain Nathan Ellis didn't yell. He didn't need to. His voice was the kind that could make your bones feel cold. Pick it up. Caleb bent down, trembling. "Do you know where you are, soldier?" the captain growled. "Do you know who lies beneath that marble 20 yards from here?" Caleb's voice cracked. "Sir, the unknowns, sir." "And do you think they dropped their rifles?" Ellis asked. "When they were bleeding out on the cliffs of Normandy, no. They held the line." You could feel it then, the weight of tradition, of eyes watching, of ghosts not forgotten. What nobody knew was that someone else was watching too, and he'd seen it all before. The sun beat down like a curse on the training grounds behind the National Heritage Amphitheater. 93 degrees, no breeze, the kind of heat that made your boots stick to the asphalt and your vision ripple. The Honor Guard was running final drills for the upcoming Centennial Memorial, the biggest event in a generation. 5 presidents were scheduled to attend, generals, world leaders. The eyes of the world would be on them, and more specifically, on the elite silent drill team. That day's challenge, the inverted suicide spin. A forbidden move in most manuals, it was a beast. Part show of dominance, part dance with physics. The rifle had to spin horizontally and vertically at the same time, then be caught blindly behind the back. It required not just strength, but precision, rhythm, feel. Caleb Monroe had dropped it 6 times in a row. "Again," barked Captain Ellis, unmoved. "We don't leave until you get it right, or until you black out. I don't care which." Caleb's arms trembled. His uniform, soaked in sweat, clung to his skin. The rest of the platoon stood behind him in tight formation, each one trying not to stare, trying not to absorb the humiliation by proximity. Ellis paced, his clipboard slapped against his thigh with each step, a predator waiting for prey to break. Off to the side, under the shade of a lonely pine tree near the rusted bench, sat an old man with a cane and a crumpled paper bag. He had been there for hours, tearing pieces of a blueberry muffin and offering them to a one-eyed pigeon that pecked at his orthopedic shoes. His name was Benjamin Holt, 81, pale skin spotted with time, fingers bent by arthritis, and eyes so blue they looked like winter sky. He watched Caleb with an eerie stillness, the kind of stillness that said he wasn't just watching, he was remembering. "He's gripping too tight," Benjamin muttered to no one, not even the bird. "He's choking the damn thing." Captain Ellis heard him. He whipped around. "Sir, this is a secured drill area. The tour path is down the hill." Benjamin didn't flinch. "I know. I helped pour that concrete in 1972. Ellis blinked. Another old-timer with a story, probably here to see the flag or talk about back in his day. "Well, unless you're here to enlist, sir, I'll have to ask you to move along. You're distracting my soldiers." Benjamin pointed a flaky crust of muffin toward Caleb. "The fear's doing that, not me. His shoulders are in his ears. You can't spin a rifle like that. Throws the balance off." Ellis stalked toward the fence line, his boots crunching gravel. "And I suppose you're an expert on ceremonial arms. Huh, watch a few parades on Veterans Day, and now you're the authority." "I know enough," Benjamin said calmly. "Enough to know that if that M1 has a regulation stock, its balance point is right at the gas cylinder lock. Your boy's gripping it at the lower band. He's fighting the weight, not moving with it." Ellis froze. That was correct? Annoyingly. Precisely correct. but there was no way in hell he was going to be corrected by a civilian in orthopedic shoes and a raisin-stained shirt in front of his platoon. "Sir, again you're not cleared to be here. Please leave." Benjamin sighed, brushing crumbs from his lap. "Just trying to help. Hate to see a good rifle treated like a barbell." Ellis ignored him. He turned back toward Caleb. "Pick it up." Caleb hesitated, but obeyed. "One more drop, Monroe, and you're off the team. You'll be scrubbing pans in Alaska by dawn." Caleb swallowed hard. He bent, lifted the rifle with trembling hands. His breath came shallow. He looked down the line at his fellow guardsmen. No one looked back. Shame and silence surrounded him. "Ready? Move." Caleb tossed the rifle. It launched uneven, unsure. The sweat betrayed him. It clipped his shoulder on the way down and bounced onto the concrete again with a sound like bones breaking. Silence. Ellis exploded. "That's it. You're finished. Get off my pad." But then, from the edge of the fence line, came a voice, low, calm, steady. "Wait." Ellis turned, jaw clenched. "Sir, I've already—" But Benjamin Holt wasn't behind the fence anymore. He was on the pad, cane in hand, walking with a strange strength in his step. Something shifted in the air. Something you could feel in your chest like the moment before thunder. Captain Ellis stepped forward, fury rising in his voice. "Sir, you need to leave immediately. This is a secure training zone." Benjamin Holt didn't even look at him. He just kept walking slow but steady right toward Caleb Monroe, who was frozen in place, still staring at the fallen rifle as if it had betrayed him. "Sir, stop right there," Ellis barked again, his voice bouncing off the steel beam surrounding the practice pad. "This is a breach of protocol." Benjamin finally turned. And when he did, something about him changed. His spine straightened, his shoulders pulled back. The old man with the muffin crumbs and pigeon friend, he disappeared. What stood in his place was someone else, someone older, yes, but sharper. He looked Ellis dead in the eye, not defiant, not disrespectful, just unshaken. "The boy isn't done," Benjamin said evenly. "He just needs to see it done right." Ellis let out a dry laugh, sarcastic and sharp. "By who you?" The squad behind him snorted under their breath, unsure whether to be amused or nervous. "That rifle weighs 10 pounds, Ellis added. "You drop it on your foot, you'll shatter a hip. Go sit down before you hurt yourself." Benjamin ignored him completely. Instead, he turned to Caleb. The boy looked unsure, stunned, even— "May I?" Benjamin asked gently, extending his hand. Caleb glanced at Ellis, who stood with arms crossed and a smirk plastered across his face. "Go ahead. Private," Ellis said. "Give him the rifle. Let's see the expert at work. Maybe after he pulls his rotator cuff, we can get back to real training." Caleb, hesitating, finally handed the weapon over. But Benjamin didn't grab it. He received it, like it was something sacred. His arthritic fingers curled around the worn walnut stock with reverence. He closed his eyes just for a moment, as if listening to the soul of the rifle, as if remembering something long buried in dust and silence. "Feels heavy, doesn't it?" he murmured to Caleb. "Yes, sir," the boy whispered, almost ashamed. "It's only heavy if you carry it," Benjamin said, opening his eyes. "If you dance with it, it's light as a feather." He took a step back, then another. Ellis watched, amused but wary. "You want to do the inverted suicide spin?" Benjamin asked, locking eyes with the captain. "That's the drill," Ellis replied, still smug, "but don't break anything." Benjamin didn't reply. Instead, he dropped his cane. It clattered against the pavement and everyone flinched. But he didn't. He didn't need it. Benjamin stood tall, heels together, feet at a 45-degree angle, the classic stance, not the wide, athletic one the young soldiers were taught now, but the kind from another era, an era of spit-shined boots and quiet excellence. Then, in a flash, he snapped the rifle to port arms. The crack of the leather sling hitting the wood echoed like a gunshot. Every soldier froze. That movement hadn't come from an old man. It came from a machine, from muscle memory burned into the bones. Benjamin moved. He launched the rifle into the air. And it didn't just spin, it sang. The rotation was flat, level, perfect. It blurred through the sky, a mesmerizing loop of wood and steel, and Benjamin didn't watch it with his eyes. He stared straight ahead, unblinking. He reached behind his back. Smack. Caught it? Perfectly. Without flinching, the sound of the catch cracked through the thick, humid air. Then, without pause, he tossed it back over his shoulder. Caught again. Flawless. The squad behind him had stopped breathing. Even Ellis had lowered his clipboard. Then, the impossible. Benjamin brought the rifle down to his side, and with one smooth motion, he balanced the entire weight of it on the tip of his index finger, right at the exact point he'd mentioned earlier. Watch the pivot, he said, calmly as if he were teaching a class, not defying gravity. With just a flick of his wrist, the rifle began to spin. Not wildly, not erratically, but beautifully. Like a propeller, a blur of discipline and balance. 10 seconds passed. The squad's mouths hung open. Then he threw it straight up, 20 feet into the sky. The rifle climbed through the air like a bird breaking free. Benjamin didn't move. He extended his right arm. Palm open! 3 seconds passed. 4. Then, whump, the rifle dropped into his hand mid-spin. He caught it vertical, in perfect order arms position, the buttstock flush against his polished orthopedic shoe. And he didn't even flinch. Silence. Nothing but the wind rustling through the trees and the distant chirp of a mockingbird. Benjamin held the pose for 5 seconds. A statue. Then, slowly, he leaned the rifle against his leg, bent down, and picked up his cane. And just like that, the tremor in his hand returned. So did the limp. And once again, he was just an old man. Captain Ellis walked forward slowly, each step cautious, like approaching a live grenade. He stared not at the rifle, but at the man holding it, or rather, who had held it. The silence was thick, reverent. No one moved. No one even blinked. Who? Ellis started, then cleared his throat. Who are you? Benjamin straightened again. Just a little. The weight of the years seemed to lift from his shoulders like the air itself had remembered who he once was. That spin, Ellis continued. Quieter now. That finger spin hasn't been in any official manual since the 60s. No one teaches that anymore. It's too dangerous. Benjamin offered a half smile, one side of his face creasing into something soft and worn, like an old photo. It's only dangerous if you don't respect the balance, he said calmly. The rifle wants to spin. It was built for it, but you have to let it. Caleb Monroe stood there like he'd just witnessed the moon land on Earth. His hands still trembled, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from awe. Ellis stared at Benjamin for a long second. And then, something clicked. His eyes narrowed. He stepped closer. He examined the man's face, the deep scar running just under his chin, the piercing blue eyes, the slightly off-kilter stance. And then, he remembered. It wasn't a memory of a person. It was a photograph. One that hung in the hallway of the old guard barracks, black and white, a moment frozen in time, a man standing at parade rest, rifle in hand, snow swirling around him like a storm of ghosts. Ellis gasped, "Wait, Holt, Benjamin Holt." The old man nodded once, almost shyly. "I thought you were just a story," Ellis whispered. The squad began to murmur. The name floated like a legend reborn. Caleb leaned toward the nearest soldier. "Who is he?" Private Reynolds whispered back. "Eyes wide, Iron Ben. That's the guy who walked the mat during the blizzard of '71, refused to stand down when they called for shelter. He never dropped his rifle. Not once. Not in 6 years." Ellis turned to his platoon, voice rising with a reverence they'd never heard before. "Attention." The entire formation snapped to... "Platoon," Ellis said, his voice now steady, grounded. "You are standing in the presence of Sergeant Major Benjamin Holt, also known as Iron Ben. He holds the longest consecutive guard record at the Tomb of the Unknowns. 6 years. Rain, snow, storms. He never left his post, and more importantly, Ellis looked back at the old man, eyes softening. He never forgot who he was guarding. Benjamin glanced at the soldiers. seeing their postures shift not just in stance, but in spirit. The smirks were gone, the tension melted into admiration. He stepped forward toward Caleb. The young man still looked like a deer caught in sunlight. Benjamin gently placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "You were trying to force it," he said. "You were trying to control the rifle, make it obey. But that's not what this is about." He took Caleb's hand and moved it slightly up the rifle's stock no more than half an inch. "There," he said. "You feel that that's the heartbeat." Caleb nodded, barely breathing. Benjamin stepped back. "Now close your eyes," he said softly. "Don't think about the cameras. Don't think about the crowd. Don't even think about your captain. Think about the men under the stones. Think about the silence they earned. They're not judging you, son. They're just glad you're here." Ellis didn't interrupt. Neither did anyone else. The entire practice pad had transformed into something sacred. Caleb closed his eyes. He exhaled slowly. He visualized the weight, the spin, the breath between the catch. He tossed the rifle. It spun clean, fast, smooth. His arm reached back. Smack. He caught it. He turned, caught again. The squad erupted into cheers. Caleb opened his eyes, stunned, then grinned so wide it looked like it might crack his face. "I did it," he whispered. "I really did it." Benjamin nodded. "Good," he said. "Now do it 1,000 more times. Do it until you can do it while bleeding, until it's in your bones." He reached down, picked up his cane. The tremor returned to his fingers. But the fire, the one in his chest, hadn't gone anywhere. Captain Ellis walked over. "Sergeant Major," he said, voice low, almost boyish, "would you stay watch the rest of the drill? We could use the critique." Benjamin checked his old wristwatch. "My granddaughter's picking me up for bingo in 30 minutes, he said, smiling. Then he looked out at the squad, at their eyes, their stances, their pride. "But I'll stay for one more spin." Benjamin Holt didn't return to the bench. He didn't pick at the muffin bag or talk to the pigeon. He stayed cane in one hand, heart in the other, watching every move like a craftsman inspecting his tools, not judging, but understanding. Captain Ellis had stepped back too. His arms were no longer crossed, his clipboard forgotten on the ground. He wasn't commanding anymore. He was learning. The squad regrouped. The line formed tighter, neater. The silence that followed was not one of fear, but of respect, a reverence that hung in the air like smoke after a rifle volley. "From the top," Ellis said, his voice now lower, slower, with intention. They began again. This time, something had changed. You could hear it. The rifle catches were crisper, the steps more fluid, the spin cleaner. The pressure was still there, presidents would still be watching in 3 days, but the fear had been replaced by purpose. They weren't just executing a drill anymore. They were delivering a message. And Benjamin stood with them not as a relic of the past, but as a bridge to it. "Private Monroe," he said, motioning Caleb forward after a round of near-perfect spins. "Come here." Caleb jogged up, heels clicking to a stop, his posture now steady. Benjamin looked him over. "You've got good instincts," he said, "but you're holding back. You're still afraid of the drop." Caleb swallowed, embarrassed. "I don't want to mess up again." "That's the problem," Benjamin replied, stepping closer. "You're thinking about not failing instead of thinking about flying." He paused, then looked down at the rifle in Caleb's hands. "Do you know how I learned the spin?" he asked, more softly now. Caleb shook his head. "I was 19, Benjamin said. "Just like you. My sergeant mean as hell told me I'd never make the silent team. Said I was too stiff, too scared. So I stayed late. Every night, practicing in the dark until my hands bled. One night, he caught me out on the pad. Thought I was screwing around. He watched me fumble 3 spins in a row. Then you know what he said." Caleb leaned in. He said, "You're not listening to the rifle." I thought he was nuts. But then I realized he was right. This thing Benjamin tapped the rifle stock has a rhythm. It wants to move a certain way. It wants to flow. If you fight it, it resists. If you guide it, it dances. He placed his hand gently over Caleb's on the rifle. "You're not here to force perfection," he said. You're here to honor the men who no longer can move. That's why we move for them. That's why we spin. That's why we never drop it, not because of pride, but because of memory." Caleb's eyes were glassy now. He nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, sir." Benjamin smiled. "Now, show me the dance again." Caleb stepped back. He raised the rifle, tossed it. It spun clean and centered. He caught it with precision. "One more rotation catch." Benjamin nodded once, better. Then, one by one, the rest of the squad followed. Private Reynolds, Corporal Vega, even young Mason, who had barely passed basic. They all took turns stepping forward and showing the spin. And each time Benjamin gave a note. Not criticism, just insight. Too much shoulder. Let the wrist do the talking. Find the breath before the throw. He was no longer just a visitor. He was a mentor, a guide, a living archive. Captain Ellis stood by the fence, arms behind his back. At some point, he had pulled out his phone and hit record, not for publicity, not for protocol, but to remember. Benjamin watched them all, and something inside him, something long locked away, began to soften. The stiffness in his back, the ache in his knees, the tremor in his hand, it all dulled. It wasn't that the pain had gone. It was that, for the first time in a long time, it was worth carrying. This wasn't nostalgia. This was legacy. And it was alive. After an hour, Ellis finally called a break. The soldiers, dripping in sweat but buzzing with pride, jogged to water stations in shady corners. Caleb, however, walked back to Benjamin. "I don't want you to leave," he said quietly. Benjamin smiled. "You don't need me anymore, son." But Caleb hesitated. "How do we make sure we keep this alive?" Benjamin looked out at the team, then back at Caleb. "You teach the next one," he said. "You show him where to grip, how to breathe, and why it matters." Caleb nodded slowly. "I will." Benjamin offered a slow salute, not sharp, not formal, but deep, earned. Caleb returned it. No one spoke as Benjamin turned toward the gate, but every eye followed him, because they knew. He hadn't just saved a soldier from failure. He'd relit the fire in an entire generation. The drill pad looked different now. Same concrete, same rifles, same heat pressing down from a sky with no clouds. But something had changed. Something in the way the team stood, something in the way they moved. But most of all, something in Caleb Monroe. 2 days had passed since Benjamin Holt walked through that gate. 2 days since an old man showed them what most had forgotten, that excellence wasn't about being the best in front of a crowd. It was about honoring those who could no longer stand next to you. Since then, Caleb had barely slept, but not because of nerves, because he couldn't wait to practice. Every spare minute, he was out on the pad, alone, focused, listening to the rifle, feeling its rhythm, just like Benjamin had taught him. At first, it was just about getting it right. Then, it became something more. He started noticing things not just about the weapon, but about himself, his grip, his breath, the way fear used to tighten his chest before every throw. That fear, gone. Not because it magically disappeared, but because he had replaced it with intention. He no longer feared dropping the rifle. He feared disrespecting what it meant. Captain Ellis watched quietly from the sidelines. He didn't bark like before. Didn't threaten. Because he didn't need to. There was no more resistance. Only commitment. On the morning of the final dress rehearsal, the squad lined up in full ceremonial blues. Every shoe gleamed. Every brass button shimmered. The amphitheater was quiet, except for the distant hum of cicadas and the soft shuffle of polished leather. "Monroe," Ellis called out. "Yes, sir." "You're leading the spin sequence." Caleb blinked. He hadn't expected that. "But, sir, Reynolds has seniority." "I know," Ellis said simply, "but you've earned it." Caleb nodded, his throat tight. "Yes, sir." The team took their positions. Across the pad, folding chairs were already being set up for the ceremony the next day. Banners waved gently, flags flanked the perimeter. Somewhere, a speaker was being tested. A quick burst of static crackled and vanished. Then silence. Ellis raised his hand. "On my command," he said. "Begin." Caleb stepped forward. Everything inside him, every muscle, every thought went still. He could hear his own breathing, hear the air move, hear the whisper of Benjamin Holt's voice still tucked somewhere in his ribs. "Don't think about the crowd. Don't think about the noise. Just think about the ones beneath the stone. You're not performing for applause, you're performing for memory." He raised the rifle. His fingers adjusted slightly half an inch higher. The heartbeat. He tossed it. It spun clean, smooth, alive. Caught, spun again, caught. He passed it behind his back, eyes steady, breath anchored. The sequence unfolded perfectly. Not fast, not showy, but precise, purposeful. By the time the rifles came down for the final catch, the entire squad looked transformed. Not by perfection, but by presence. Ellis nodded once. Good. Again. They did it again. Then again. And by the fourth time, Caleb didn't even hear the commands anymore. His body moved with memory, not fear. He no longer needed praise. The silence between the spins, that's where he found meaning. After the sixth run, Ellis called for a break. Caleb sat under the same tree where Benjamin had once fed that ragged pigeon. The bench still had a few crumbs on it, maybe from that same muffin bag. He ran a hand over the worn wood. Private Mason sat beside him. "You ever think about what happens after this?" Mason asked, panting slightly. After the ceremony, Caleb replied, "No, I mean after the guard, when we're older, slower, forgotten." Caleb looked out at the pad, at the concrete, at the rifles lined up on the rack like sentinels waiting to be chosen. "I think," he said slowly, "if we do this right, if we really honor what it stands for, we'll never be forgotten." Mason nodded, then grinned. "Still hope I get to spin like the old guy did one day." Caleb chuckled. "That's not the goal anymore. What is? To make sure the next kid believes he can." That night, Caleb stayed late again. Not because he was scared, but because he wanted to be ready, not for the audience, not for the applause, but for Benjamin, because deep down, he knew the old man might show up. Maybe behind the crowd, maybe leaning on his cane again, maybe wearing that same button-down and dusty smile. And when he did, Caleb wanted to be the kind of soldier who didn't just execute a move, but carried a memory. The day of the centennial ceremony arrived like a slow breath held for 100 years. The amphitheater was transformed, rows of white chairs fanned out beneath towering flags, each one rippling in the morning breeze. Uniformed officers stood watch on every corner. Drones hovered above like silent hawks. News crews whispered into microphones. The crowd of dignitaries stretched as far as the eye could see: ambassadors, generals, Gold Star families, veterans in folding chairs, and school children with paper flags. And then there was the guard, standing at attention in their full ceremonial blues, rifles in hand, boots aligned so precisely you could balance a coin across them. At the center of it all, Private Caleb Monroe. No longer the trembling 19-year-old with sweaty palms and eyes darting for approval. Now he stood like stone grounded, calm and quietly burning. Captain Ellis paced behind them. No barking, no shouting, just one quiet nod. "Make it count." The band struck the first note. Deep, somber brass rolled through the space like thunder beneath the earth. The announcer's voice boomed from the speakers. And then the silent drill began. Not a word. Not a cue. Just motion unified and sharp. The crowd fell into a reverent hush. Then came the moment. The inverted suicide spin. The move that had once broken Caleb now belonged to him. He stepped forward, eyes forward, hands steady. He tossed the rifle, and for a moment just a heartbeat time stopped. The rifle spun once, twice, slicing the air with silent grace. Smack, he caught it clean. Behind the back, again, caught. The crowd gasped, but Caleb didn't hear them. He wasn't performing for them. He wasn't even thinking of them. He was thinking of the white stones beyond the hedges, of the silence that stretched beneath the grass, of the man who once whispered, "You're not here to impress the living, you're here to remember the fallen." And in that moment, He understood. All of it. This wasn't about rifles or uniforms or medals. It was about duty, memory, legacy. When the drill ended, the entire team froze in position, rifles grounded, arms straight, posture perfect. And then the applause came. It roared through the trees. People rose to their feet. Some saluted, others cried. Veterans stood with aching knees and trembling hands. But the guard didn't move. Not yet. Not until the last note faded. Not until silence had returned. Afterward, as the crowd began to disperse and cameras turned away, Caleb found himself alone near the edge of the pad. The rest of the team was posing for photos or shaking hands with admirals. But Caleb, he was searching. And then he saw him, sitting quietly on a wooden bench beneath the shade of an old sycamore. Same checkered shirt, same beige trousers. Same cane resting at his feet. Benjamin Holt, the Iron Sentinel. He didn't wave. He didn't clap. He just nodded once, like a final salute from one soldier to another. Caleb walked over, slower now, not with hesitation, but with something deeper humility. Benjamin looked up, a faint smile creasing his weathered face. You didn't drop it, he said softly. No, sir, Caleb replied. I heard it. Benjamin chuckled. What did it say? That it wanted to fly? Benjamin tapped his cane against the ground. That's good, he said. Now teach the next one. Caleb sat beside him. For a long moment, neither said a word. They just watched the flag sway against the blue sky. I was scared, Caleb finally admitted. Back when you showed up, I thought I wasn't good enough. You weren't, Benjamin said plainly. None of us are at first, but that's why we train. That's why we remember. Caleb nodded. I think I understand now. The spin, the silence, the weight. Benjamin looked at him. No, he said gently. You don't. Not yet. But you will. One day. Maybe when you're the old man on the bench and some kid's shaking like a leaf. They both laughed. Then Benjamin checked his wristwatch, cracked, old but still ticking. My granddaughter's picking me up, he said, standing slowly. If I'm late for bingo again, she'll court-martial me. Caleb stood too. Thank you, he said, for everything. Benjamin adjusted his cap, turned toward the path. And before he walked away, he said one last thing. Remember, private, the uniform doesn't make the soldier makes the uniform. Then he walked into the sun, the crowd parting, unaware that a living legend was passing among them. And as he disappeared into the ordinary world, Caleb turned back toward the training pad. He picked up his rifle and gripped it half an inch higher, right where the heartbeat lived. We often look at the elderly and only see what time has taken their strength, their speed, their youth. But we forget to see what time has left behind. Inside every wrinkled face is a battle won, a lesson earned, a skill mastered not through books, but through endurance. Benjamin Holt didn't return to teach a spin. He came to remind us that true greatness isn't loud, it's steady. The world moves fast. We chase newness, performance, applause. But sometimes we must pause and listen to those who've stood guard in silence so we could live in freedom. Respect your elders not for what they used to do, but for what they still carry. Because legacy doesn't age. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and tap the bell. Share it with someone who needs to remember legacy never fades. Thanks for watching. See you in the next story.